What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about toxic masculinity, oppression, and we're going to make a link between toxic masculinity and this act of domestic terrorism that unfortunately unfolded in Charlottesville, Virginia. You see, toxic masculinity isn't just harmful to men, it's harmful to everyone because it teaches men to hate difference, use violence, and ultimately be oppressive. Let's start from the beginning. How would a 10-year-old boy feel to be told he acts like or does anything like a girl? He would feel defeated. Why? Because like a girl means you suck. And even thinking more generally about the insulting things that men say to each other, what do most of these words and phrases have in common? They refer to women or the LGBT community. Now ask yourself, if it is an insult to be referred to as a woman or a member of the LGBT community, what message does that send? It sends a message that these people are inferior or less than. You see, how we choose to talk about people and speak about them sets a foundation for how they're thought of and treated. Oppressive behaviors and ideologies are fed to us from a very young age in the form of verbal expressions. And with time, this verbal expression, this hate speech becomes so normal that it finds its way into our everyday conversations. And this is dangerous because there are too many people in our country who believe that just because something's normal, it's right or acceptable, and that is not true. Now also take into consideration that we live within a culture that is fascinated with violence, so much so that it uses it as a form of entertainment and uses it to solve conflict. This is also dangerous because it places value on violence when there isn't any. The only thing that violence guarantees is tragedy and that someone is going to be hurt. Verbal manifestations of hatred are the first steps taken towards oppression and violence on the individual level as well as the societal level. So let's take a look at this in the context of men's violence against women. But before we do, I want to make it very clear that most men are not abusive. I'm going to say it again, most men are not abusive. It is a very small percentage of men who commit these offenses, but they just do it over and over and over. Oftentimes warning signs show themselves, but because disrespect and hatred is so normal in our society, it goes unchecked and unchallenged. So, men who abuse women don't start their relationships with physical abuse. They wouldn't get to a second date if they did. It often starts with verbal expressions, calling women bitches, hoes, and a variety of other insulting and degrading terms. You see, the goal here is to establish a sense of otherness. It's to call these group of people something that no one else wants to be, something that no one else wants to be affiliated with, so that no one comes to their help. It is also an attempt to try and get some kind of rationalization for why you can abuse this person, right? It's just a bitch. People call Muslims terrorists, even though that is statistically false to refer to a whole group of people like that. Black people in history were referred to as heathens. It was said that they were cursed by Christianity while they were enslaved and tortured. Even Native Americans were referred to as savages before they were killed and their land was taken from them. You see, by observing men who abuse women, I can see how abuse and oppression happens on the individual level. And by not challenging these people, these mindsets and these tactics, we are doing our country a great disservice. We're also doing the younger generation a great disservice because until young people realize the power they have as catalysts of change, until they realize the power they have as creators of culture, they are stuck with the culture that we leave for them. And if that is one that teaches hatred of difference, violence, and oppression like toxic masculinity does, people are going to continue to suffer because of no fault of their own. They are going to continue to be mistreated because of how they're born, where they're born, and a number of other reasons that don't even matter. Now, this video was originally intended to demonstrate the connection between toxic masculinity and violence against women, but with what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia this past weekend, I would be remiss if I did not make the connection between toxic masculinity and this ignorant act of domestic terrorism that occurred. Heather Heyer was killed by a man who drove his car into a group of innocent protesters because they disagreed with him. This man, this terrorist, hurt and killed more than a dozen people because they had a different opinion than him. You see, violence is an oppressive tactic. And men who abuse women are just like oppressive societies in that they use violence as an attempt to either maintain power and control or regain it after they have lost it. What is also unfortunate about what happened in Charlottesville is that this man, this coward, he has an audience. There are people in his corner rooting for him, and the hatred of difference that drives the rise in anti-Semitism that is currently taking place in our country because it is going unchecked. If you think that this is wrong, if you want this to stop, then the very least you can do is start a conversation about this. The very least you can do is have this conversation with your peers in your communities and make it very clear that this will not be tolerated. We are better than this. When you do and say nothing, you facilitate the violence. When you do and say nothing and act like it's not your problem, you side with the oppressors and the abusers because that is all they ask you to do, is nothing. Start the conversation and take action.